Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our virtual Lunch and Learn event today, Organizational Leadership During a Cultural Change. My name is Mr Kane. I'm your VP of Member Development. And before we introduce our speaker today, I would first like to thank our sponsor for the 2021 Lunch and Learn series, Carr, Riggs and Ingrams. Joining us today from Carr, Riggs and Ingram, we have Frank Mason, one of the partners here in Gainesville, Florida. Frank, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Steve.
Fantastic. Why don't you share with us some information on Carr, Riggs and Ingram?
Sure. So we're glad to be part of the Chamber's Lunch and Learn series and hope that you'll take an opportunity to check us out sometime. Last Lunch and Learn, I talked about one of our portfolio companies that's called PayWorks, which is a payroll service provider company. And today I want to talk a little bit about another entity that's called AuditWorks. AuditWorks is a boutique CPA firm that specializes in cyber risk advisory, compliance, and professional consulting services for clients throughout the US and Canada. We offer services designated to identify and mitigate organizational threats, solve complex business challenges, review internal business processes and controls, and help clients protect information against an evolving threat and vulnerability society that we currently live in. Some of the other services that they perform are security assessments, ISO 27001 readiness assessments, and data privacy assessments. So if your entity is involved in the virtual platform at all, whether you're front-facing with clients or internally for your organization itself, please check us out, cricpa.com, and go to our portfolio company link, and you'll find AuditWorks there. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you again, Frank. We appreciate your support for these past 5 years with our Lunch and Learn series. You guys have been great partners in helping us with our members and our professional development. So again, thank you so much. And for those of you attending, I would like to let you know that if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to enter them in the chat box and we will get them presented to the speaker in a timely fashion. So today I am pleased to introduce our speaker today, Mr. Cain Davis. Cain is the CEO at Diversified Consulting Concepts. Cain is a civil rights and leadership expert who has been employed as a civil rights professional for city, county, nonprofit, state, federal, and private sector employers. His experiences include providing coaching, training, and consulting to thousands of employees, elected appointed officials, and the general public regarding the interpretation and implementation of civil rights legislation. Cain has led large organizations, as many as 1,300 employees, both again private and public sector. And he was also a retired combat officer from the U.S. Armed Forces, where he served for 24 years. Cain is a graduate of the University of Florida and a graduate of the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute. He holds a certification from the U.S. Equal Opportunity Employment Commission as an EEO investigator and the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Trainings De-escalation Instructor course. Really pleased to welcome today our friend, Mr. Cain Davis. Cain, take it away.
Are we there yet?
You are there, sir.
Hey, thanks, and I'm sorry for the delay. This topic is one of the topics that I think every employer should be addressing. Sadly, we have employers who are not addressing this issue. We have some who really want to engage it, but are not quite sure what and how they should do it. And then we actually have quite a few who are really taking, embracing it, and trying to do the right thing, and are learning some things that actually are helping not only their organizations, but also the communities in which they work and play. This is the agenda I'll be following. I will be spending a lot more time with your best practices and Q&A, because I do believe that this is a subject where people really need some infrastructure to really start doing things in a way that is profitable as it relates to relationships with employees, efficiencies, and all the things we want as employers. And also, I know that this subject matter, there's just a ton of questions out there, and I hope that I'm in a position today to help answer some of those questions. A lot of people look at what's happening in our society today and actually think, man, this is kind of new, what's going on. I want to assure you that this is just another one of those cultural changes that we have experienced in America that is based on race. And I know if you have any type of age on you, you've seen all of these different words: segregation, desegregation, multiculturalism, diversity. And now we're changing to, is it going to be equity? Is it going to be cultural awareness? There's just a lot of things that are happening now. And quite frankly, I don't think we're going to be able to know exactly what the real outcome is until a couple of years from now. But please be assured that this is something we will all get through. It's just another one of those cultural changes that we're going through our society. I think a lot of this particular issue in today's cultural change really started with police community relations. And I don't think it started with George Floyd's death. I think it really started getting some real legs with the Trayvon Martin death, the Michael Brown shooting, and even before then. But I think those two cases really galvanized many groups across this country. And George Floyd incident happened to happen at a time when there was just a lot of things going on in our country. And many of us had an opportunity to kind of work at home, and we got to see a videotape, probably more than we should have. But it caused people to really start questioning where are we as it relates to race in our country. And that has really evolved to something that is almost just the opposite of what we were used to in the past. This particular lady, and you can Google this is a female owner of an Asian restaurant, and she's pointing to a sign that said, "I've heard enough from old white men." Now, in today's society, it has become very fashionable to criticize white men. But could you imagine if that sign read, "I've heard enough from young black males"? Would our reaction be the same? Would this owner actually have this sign? Probably not. I don't know if anyone is aware, if anyone has ever seen this language. This language came from a training program by a major company in the United States. This is what they were sharing with their employees. And I can tell you, as you read through this, there's just a couple things that really stand out, but I will only talk about the last one. Try to be less white. What if it read, "Try to be less black"? Would this be in a company's training program on diversity? I would venture to say it probably wouldn't. One of the problems with the two examples I just shared with you is that they both come with some very legal consequences. And these consequences, I think a lot of companies are not considering these consequences when they engage in those type of activities. And today I'm going to talk about a couple of sets of consequences, one dealing with EEOC and how they view these things, and then look at some, at least one court case and some incidents that are actually in the court process as we speak today. First, let's look at EEOC. EEOC defines discrimination very simple. I cannot discriminate against you based on your race, based on your color, your sex, national origin, whatever it is. So now if we look at the two previous examples, both of those are actually identifying a segment of employees by their race. As someone who has investigated quite a few EEO complaints, I can tell you it's very difficult to get evidence where someone is saying, we're going to treat Black people this way, where it's in writing like these two examples, where it's exposed and shared with anybody who's in the vicinity. So this, to me, as an investigator, I look at it and say, man, this is some clear evidence of a difference in treatment. And that is how EEOC looks at it. That is how the courts look at it. So I would encourage companies to really evaluate how they are implementing and addressing cultural awareness, social justice issues within their workplace. EEOC goes further and talks about harassment. And harassment can be anything: remarks, slurs, posters, pictures, and the frequency and severity. Well, if you take the incident of the Asian owner with that sign, everybody who enters that building or that particular area will see that sign. So it's very frequent. And depending on the complainant, they will talk about the severity of that. Another thing that's associated with harassment in any form of discrimination is the adverse action, which is just basically is management taking an action against that employee. Let's say, for example, you go to the example of the Asian owner. Her sign says, "We've heard enough from white males." So now when we have a team meeting, are we also telling the white males who work for us that they can't talk, they can't participate? If we are in clear violation of EEO laws. And I want to tell you that over the last year, I have consulted with executive team members who were very proud of the fact that they started a discussion around race relations. And in their opening remarks, they said things like, I would like for the white employees to be quiet, sit back and listen. Listen to the people of color. Now, just imagine as a white employee, and I would even say, even as a non-white employee, that would have to be a very uncomfortable situation. And not only is it uncomfortable, it carries some legal liability with it. Again, looking at both of those examples that I shared with you, how is it that my whiteness, my blackness, my brownness have anything to do with my job? And that's one of the things that EEOC looks at. Did it have anything to do with your job? And does my job require me to be black, white, brown? And if it doesn't, EEOC is going to find that to be a violation. Another thing is respondents. A respondent is the person who is alleged to have created a discriminatory act. Well, some of the myths around that is a black person can't file a complaint against another black person. Well, I can remember like back in the 80s when we were dealing with this issue, particularly in a city like Atlanta, we have a lot of cases of black people filing complaints against other blacks. And most of these complaints was based on color. You either had a light-skinned black filing complaints against dark-skinned blacks, or dark-skinned blacks filing complaints against light-skinned blacks. So it can happen that a person of the same race can file a complaint against someone else. It also can happen that a white person file a complaint against a non-white person. And one of the better examples of that would be this first case here from 2009. This is just basically a case where public safety employees, fire department employees, they all were required to take a test. And that was kind of common, you know, in the public safety arena, people take tests. Those individuals who come to the top, they are actually eligible for a promotion. Well, in New Haven, Connecticut, the fire department administered the test. The test results came back, and disproportionately, whites passed that test significantly more than did blacks and Hispanics. So that resulted in city management looking at that and deciding, you know, we think these tests are discriminatory towards minorities, and so we're not going to consider these test results. We're going to promote people a different way. And they really had what EEOC and the courts would look at as, they had a very legitimate concern. There's something in the law that's called disparate impact. And what that means is you could actually have a very neutral policy, such as we're going to administer a test. But if that test indicates that there's a disparity in how people pass the test, such as in this example, a disproportionate amount of whites pass as opposed to minorities fail in the test or scoring lower on the test. So that's that disparity impact. It impacts a group and disadvantages them. Well, in this particular case, they filed a lawsuit, and they being 19 white individuals and 1 Hispanic. Those individuals scored higher on the test, and they wanted those results to be counted. Well, they filed a lawsuit. The city maintained that, hey, these tests have a disparate impact on minorities. At one point, the case even got kicked out of court, but that case actually ended up at the Supreme Court. And I remember at the time, if you went to any type of civil rights meeting or conference, we talked this case to death, because we, for the most part, was assured the disparate impact provision of the law would uphold. Well, the Supreme Court came back and said, no, these individuals followed the process. They scored higher, and they mandated that the city go back from 2003, 2004, when these officers took the test, and promote all those individuals that was eligible based on the test results. So that was a case where it shows that individuals who are not what we would call minorities can prevail in our court system based on filing a complaint of discrimination. The second case, I think most of us probably remember when Starbucks, Philadelphia Starbucks, 2 gentlemen, 2 African Americans went in. They were escorted out in handcuffs. Shannon Phillips was the regional manager of 100 Starbucks stores. Shannon was called by senior management and was asked, okay, so I think we need to discipline this white male manager. And Shannon took the position, wait a minute, that store is managed by a black male. And a couple of days later, management basically came to Shannon and says, you know, you're not going to be a fit for this company. At least this is Shannon's lawsuit. So we're going to dismiss you. Shannon's lawsuit included allegations that management literally targeted white people who had nothing to do with this decision for disciplinary action, including her, who they terminated. And then this third case is dealing with Cheryl. She was a advanced placement director at the local high school. Her son went on social media, a 14-year-old kid, and he made some racial statements. And she, in her attempts to defend her son, and not his statements, but to defend him like I think most parents would, try to defend their child, she was actually demoted and reassigned because she attempted to defend her child from these allegations. Now, both of these cases, the one with Shannon and with Cheryl, are both in our court and complaint systems. And we're going to learn a lot from the decisions that are made on these two cases about where we go in the future. And the last thing I'd like to share with you all is we see people being referred to Karen all the time. And in our society today, we know that Karen is a derogatory term. And not only is it about race, but it's also sex, because it targets white females. And when we refer to, and I've actually counseled individuals who have filed complaints because they were called Karen in a workplace. And when you look at the EEOC standards, was this done based on race? Was it derogatory? This type of language that I think some employers are allowing in the workplace, it really needs to be balanced with what their legal liability and exposure is. Because I think at the end of the day, there will be some bad things happening to people because they're not taking their social justice movement and balanced it with what the expectations of the law is. I'm going to go through a few of these costs, but I think most of them are kind of self-explanatory. If you take company reputation, for example, when Coca-Cola had that training that I showed you a slide from, their CEO had to go out and apologize for that training. And you got to think, they actually paid someone to provide that training, and then they had to throw the training in the garbage and then publicly apologize for it. So you want to make sure that what has been said on behalf of your company is something that your senior advisors, HR, legal, executive team is looking at, making sure it does fit with their mission and objectives as an organization. Oftentimes, when you are a good employee, you do not have to hang around an environment that has a lot of confusion, discrimination, hostility in it. So as a company, you lose good people because of that. So you want to manage that in a responsible way. And vice versa, your company gets a reputation. I counseled a senior executive about 2 months ago, and she was thinking about going to another company. But she had heard so many negative things about the manager, the executive that she was going to work for. And she decided she didn't want to work for someone like that. So you are losing good qualified people who can help your company if you are really not managing this in a responsible way. And I can tell you, I've never investigated a complaint of discrimination where employees weren't taking sides, and the company lose so much energy, they lose so much efficiency because people spend time at the water cooler talking about the discrimination or the alleged discrimination. When they go visit someone in the office, instead of talking about the project they're working on, they're talking about the conflict in the office. So these are costs that you pay. When I was the director for the state of Alabama Civil Rights HUD Division, we had a settlement with a company, and that company had about 300 employees in the state of Alabama. And we had enough evidence to prove that they had, in fact, discriminated against someone. But they had like 4,000 employees all across the country. So they realized that we had enough evidence. So they agreed to a settlement. And in this settlement agreement, some of the things that existed was all of their employees had to be trained. Can you imagine taking all of your employees off for a training that you probably should have to go through, at least in the detail we required? An 8-hour training on EEO and civil rights. All 3,600 of your employees, even though it only happened at this one location, they had about 350 employees. So all 3,600 of their employees had to be trained. We required them to make monetary donations to local civil rights groups who were fighting, nonprofit groups who were fighting discrimination. And then compliance monitoring. Well, if you get up under one of these consent degrees or settlement agreements, you literally have to pay somebody to monitor it to make sure you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing. And then the last thing is, when you have a settlement agreement with whether it's the DOJ, EEOC, or HUD, or any other civil rights organization, you're gonna probably have to hire a consultant. They will not allow your internal staff to do the training. So you're gonna have to hire a consultant. And every consultant knows, well, if it's being mandated by DOJ, HUD, or EEOC, you will probably be charged probably one of the highest percentages. So please recognize these are things you can eliminate simply by doing the right thing. I want to talk a little bit about the best practices. And one of the things that I tell everyone and try to encourage people to do is really look and get your CEO and executive team members involved. Because as I stated earlier, with the Coca-Cola company, the CEO is the individual who has to come out and try to fix these things. And we have numerous cases just in the last year where CEOs were fired because these things were not handled properly. So the CEO and executive teams should be involved with training. So many times when I started training for a company, employees will ask, is the senior leadership going to participate in this training, or is this just for us? Employees are noticing it. But more importantly is, I get a call occasionally from an employee who says, hey, Mr. Davis, during our training, didn't you tell us we had to do A, B, C, D? I said, yes, that's correct. And then they said, well, why was this morning in a all employee meeting, the team leader or executive leader stood up and said, we need to do E, F, G. So these senior leaders who are not involved in these training, many times they are doing things just the opposite of what they paid a consultant to teach their employees. And so it really undermines their credibility as leaders when they are not fully engaged in these type activities along with their employees. Supervisor engagement. All of these issues are handled at the supervisory level. So if you are not training your frontline supervisors and anyone who supervises someone in their obligations and responsibilities as it relates to EEO, social justice, cultural awareness, you are undermining the organization. Because as an employee, I go to my immediate supervisor to help address these issues. And if he or she is incapable or unwilling or just simply are not aware of their obligations, that instantly exposes the company to liability. Hire, train, and recruit an expert. I can't say that any louder. You have to hire people or train people or hire an expert that knows and understands this law, because it's not just a cultural movement. It is wrapped in all type of legal ramifications. And you want someone who can help do that, help your staff work through some of these very complex issues. Know what your mission and policies are. Oftentimes, in some of the cases I've dealt with, you will find managers doing something that's just the opposite of what their written policies state. And I'm literally seeing EEOC judges ask managers, say, you know, I'm reading your policy, it says this. Why are you doing this? Totally contrary. And there's almost within the EEOC arena, from my perspective, there's almost a lack of trust of management when they have a written policy, but they're doing things just the opposite of their policy. Because it's hard to explain the business reason for you deviating from a policy that you spent time developing and many times paid consultants to provide, and yet you are not following it. And then, especially during this time, I honestly think you really need to look at your policies and see if they need to be updated. Make sure they are applicable to everyone, not just whites, not just blacks, not just to brown people, but to everyone. One of the things that I hear a lot and I see amongst executive team leaders is a lot of them are equating someone's race and ethnicity to qualifications. They will go to a Black person or a Latino person and say, we're having this issue based around race and ethnicity. Could you help us deal with it? Well, this is an expertise. And though those people bring rich experiences, they may not be familiar with what the legal requirements are. So you want to make sure that you're not just doing that. And if you're going to do that, spend some money to get that person qualified, if they're going to lead your efforts in this. Another thing that I have noticed, and I've shared two of them with you, is a lot of people are using diversity and inclusion as a reason to attack whites and others. And, you know, I can remember when I first got into the civil rights business, we welcomed people who were different. We welcomed people who didn't support diversity and inclusion because we wanted to understand them. We wanted to have a chance to share with them how it was advantageous even to them to embrace diversity and inclusion. But today, that's almost, if you don't agree with many of the people who advocate diversity and inclusion, then they have no use for you. They don't want to talk to you. They say things about you that are inappropriate. And yes, this is happening in the workplace, not just in the community, but in the workplace. Another thing that I would caution you about is make sure that when you're dealing with employees, you are sure that their rights are the rights that you are addressing. For example, I dealt with a manager recently, an executive whose agreement literally had in it that they will not, if they have a dispute, they will not seek a jury trial. Now, if you have an employee with certain agreements, you need to look at those agreements and make sure you're following and complying with those kind of things. Take immediate and appropriate action. This is the number one thing that happens that causes liability for companies. I mentioned earlier about making sure that frontline staff frontline supervisors are trained, and this is why. Oftentimes, a frontline supervisor, because they know a person, because they are just really not knowledgeable about what to do in an EEO situation, they kind of get buddy with the people, say, hey, Cain, I realize that, but can you work with me? It's not a big deal. I know what's going on. I'm not holding it against you. And those kind of things, that may have been immediate action, but it wasn't appropriate by EEOC guidelines. And it's just liability for the company. And the last thing I'd like to share with you is this issue is technical because you do need an expert. But the other thing we have to look at is so much of this is driven by the heart. And you have to include non-traditional partners. Like, for example, you have to include maybe a consultant. You never used consultants before, use a consultant. You never had an EEO staff member, maybe you want to hire an EEO staff member. You never really vetted issues with HR in great detail. You kind of just take an HR word. Maybe you should be sitting down with HR and saying, tell me, why are we making this decision in this case? Don't just take their word. They're good and qualified. I used to be an HR director, so I know. And I think they're some of the most competent people in organizations. But leadership has to start engaging these people in a much different way. And on that hard side, man, we have some highs and lows when we're dealing with these kind of issues. And it takes longer. Like a technical issue, if you ask me, Cain, could you develop me a policy? I can develop your policy. It's good. We'll train people on it. And in 60 days, all your staff will be trained on it. But if it's a hard issue, which a lot of these issues are, it's going to take longer for us to work through it. And I think we have to look at progress as opposed to resolving it. Like I can resolve the lack of a policy issue relatively quick, but we have to look at some of these hard issues as progress, because if you have a conflict in the workplace and you're looking to see, well, if it's a violation of policy, no, it's not a violation of policy, it's not a violation of law, it's just a personal conflict. How do we deal with it? How do we deal with it in a constructive way that we can actually make progress and get these employees working? And the last thing I'll say about this is we have to start doing things a little different. So some of it will be experimental. I'll just suggest that if you are going to experiment, you sit down with whether it's legal, HR, or your EEO person and talk about what you're trying to do and vet what is the best way to do it that would actually protect your company from any type of legal liability, company reputation, and all the things that I think companies should be concerned with. I want to thank you for paying attention, and I'm available to answer any questions, and I hope you have a lot of it.
Thank you very much, Cain. That was an extremely informative presentation. I really appreciate it. So first, I just want to take the time to thank you for spending this time with us and providing so much information. I do have one question, which is, what do you feel is the difference between implicit bias and racism?
Implicit bias is many times just people are simply not aware. You know, you could literally do some things that is offensive to someone and you don't know it's offensive. As opposed to racism, the examples would be what I think in the examples I showed you from Coca-Cola and from the Asian restaurant owner. Those are blatant examples of racism. And I think the thing around implicit bias is really us working together, getting to know people who are different from us. And when I say people, you know, I can have a best friend who is white, but I can guarantee you that one white friend cannot tell me what are some of the concerns of all whites. So I may know what one white person's opinion is. I need to put that in my toolbox, but I also need to be very conscious of the fact that all whites do not believe what my good white friend believes.
One more question I have is, have there been any practices you've seen with the companies that you work with that you found especially impressive that you could just tell us a little bit about, maybe a program that you thought was very effective?
Yes, I think the most effective programs are by far the ones that people either hire a staff member who is an expert in this area or individuals who use consultants who are experts in this area. And why is that? Because that person, a couple of things. One, they have a network of peers. So when they get an issue, just like if I was an engineer or a doctor, a lawyer, whatever, I can call somebody and say, hey, can you help me with this? Have you seen a case like this, a scenario like this? And then the other thing is, when they hear things, they are not just looking at it from the company's perspective, whether it fits the culture of the company, but is that something that is illegal? Is it legal? How can we implement it? And the key to all of this is people sitting down talking through what they desire. And those people really accepting the advice of whomever they have as their expert. Because you can talk to an expert and an expert can say, well, you know what, I understand what you're trying to do. There are several ways to do it, but these two ways would be illegal. This particular way will be closest to what you want, but it will also be legal. And we could have executive team and even EEOC stand behind us if we ever challenge. So it is just a collaboration of individuals from frontline employees to senior level leaders really addressing issues. And that, when I say that, I'm not talking about them meeting together all the time, because I do believe executives need to meet separately, because they can say what they feel, because they can't say what they feel with frontline supervisors, because many times executives they're just like everybody else. They have some very strong opinions about things, and they need to be able to express them in an environment where it's safe, and they do not have to worry about being sued or having a complaint filed.
Thank you. I just got another one. Are there any books or literature or anything like that, online resources that you highly recommend or that you found especially insightful?
You know, books, I tend to focus on the regulations and the law, because the one thing, especially now, if you pick up almost any book dealing with cultural competency or equity, I'm not read one, and I've read the top 2 or 3, which I think most people are aware of, and they have things in them that I think are just ripe for legal liability if a company employ those tactics.
That's interesting. I actually don't have any more questions, and I'm not receiving any more. I was wondering if you had any closing thoughts or remarks that you wanted to share with us.
I would just simply, one, I want to thank you, the Chamber, and Frank for sponsoring this, and you for giving an opportunity to provide this presentation. And I just want to encourage people that, one, we are going to get through this cultural change, but we need to stick to those things that we know that can be sustained over a long period of time. And those things include precedents in court law and the guidance issued by EEOC. Thank you very much for your time today.
Cain, we really appreciate you taking your time today to join us and share with our members your straightforward perspective on social injustices and how we can be better as a society when dealing with these. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us today. Frank, as always, Carriggs and Ingrams, thank you so much. We really appreciate your support of our professional development efforts here at the Chamber. And thank you to everyone that joined us today. We look forward to seeing you again next month. Have a great day, everyone.